everybody. Thank you for being here and for helping me build cultural bridges. No, I'm not going to be talking about the Pilgrims. My book, Wampanoag Art for the Ages, Traditional and Transitional, is what I'll be talking about. And I always start by saying, imagine, if you will, what it would be like to have lived before contact and to have provided your life with your own two hands and body in season, and the artfulness of that, the challenge, the independence, the freedom, and the beauty. And what I've tried to do in this book, and the artisans in the book are doing, is preserving some of that tradition. And for the Wampanoag, as with all indigenous cultures of Turtle Island, art is not separated from life, nor spirit from material. There is none of the Western ethic of dominance over the earth. Rather, everything is filled with spirit, it's alive, and man is no better and no worse than everything in nature: rock, skies, stars, animals, four-legged, winged. And art really results from supplying your needs in season with your hands and body from the earth. And it was not to hang on the wall without a use, but an integral part of providing for the basics of food and shelter, clothing, entertainment, and of ceremony. In fact, there is a kind of thin line between use and ceremony amongst indigenous people for the objects that they crafted and still craft, most always, never say always, combine the material with the spiritual. And while ceremonial objects were and are created in and of themselves, more quotidian objects, even a spoon, a bowl, could express the sacred because of the relationship between the object and what it came from. So everything always starts in the wetu. This actually is an Algonquian wetu, but it's not a Wampanoag wetu. And the Algonquian language group is what part of the Wampanoag are part of. It exists from the southeast all the way up the coast, interjected by the Iroquois peoples, and then over into Canada. By the way, I am not indigenous. I'm not Wampanoag. I was privileged with access because of a long time involvement as a journalist, having written many articles about the tribe, and also as an activist involved in saving land. So I don't speak for the tribe. I'm just a vessel through which their voices can communicate what they want to say about what they do with their art, why they do it, and how they do it. So, as I say, it's in the wetu that really all the arts are encompassed. And you can see there white cedar saplings, and you can see them more closely here. They are collected in the spring when they're flexible to bend. Around this neck of the woods, they're still collected from the Hockomock Swamp and the Bridgewater Triangle. How many of you are local, and how many of you are tourists? Any of you tourists come in here? Okay, so they're set with ceremony and prayer every step of the way. There's a female and male duality to the setting of those poles in the ground. And Annawon Weeden, who is my informant for the building of wetus, talks about how they're set with tobacco, prayer, and thanks, because they consider the cedar to be living entities, living beings. And so they want to treat the cedar with which their wetus are built with respect. What we're looking at here is on the left a summer wetu, and on the right a winter wetu, and you have pictures of those back there at the back end over there. And there's an ishoon, a canoe, a dugout canoe in front. I don't have canoes in the book, but I did. What Annawon always talks about is how the round worm of the wetu, which is representational of the womb, is warmer. It circulates air, he says. It's drier, and it prevents abuse to the structure during storms. And it's movable. Although wetus were built in a semi-permanent way, you could take up the mats and the coverings and move to another wetu if a terrible storm was coming. The summer wetus were more individuated in terms of a more nuclear family, but you get grandpa and grandma and the kids perhaps living in the summer wetu. And that would be what they would be in now, and that would be towards, on the Cape, the motion was from inland to outland seasonally. So in the fall, they would start to be moving inland towards the longhouses, the larger wetus, and those were often, they were, in fact, clan run, and that was, the women here will be happy to hear, matriarchal. It was a matrilineal and matriarchal society, and they got to make the decisions, along with the men, but the summer wetu is about 15 feet across, 12 feet high, and the winter longhouse, a typical nush wetu or a 3-fire house, is about 30 feet long by 20 feet wide by 12 feet high. Elaborating on matriarchy in Wampanoag life, Bear Clan Mother Bear Anita Peters, who is another informant for the book, and I'll get to her because she's very cool. She's a regalia maker. I love it. She's got a sticker on her car that says, "Please, don't feed the pilgrims." So, she says you get your clan affiliation from your mother's side. The clan mother is chosen by the families, and they in turn chose the male leaders, those which took care of the most people the most by giving away the most. Mashpee Wampanoag clans include bear, turtle, deer, beaver, otter, eel, eagle, and rabbit, and throughout North America's clan systems in general. Each animal will confer certain attributes and gifts upon the clans, which are in turn responsible for certain attributes and aspects of governance. And in return, the animals are reciprocated, they're honored with ceremonial obligations. And any indigenous person, especially the Wamps, and yes, it's not disrespectful, they call themselves Wamps, will tell you that reciprocity is a huge part of their ethic. Don't take anything without giving back. This is a summer wetu. It's a pretty typical summer wetu covered with cattail matting, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. I wanted to mention that the evergreens, including the cedar, which are used for these houses, are sacred, not just because of their own beings as entities, but Jonathan Perry, who's an Aquinnah Wampanoag, and my informants for this book are both Mashpee Wampanoag and Aquinnah Wampanoag. Aquinnah, for those of you who are tourists, is out there on the Martha's Vineyard, and the Wampanoag Confederacy is all the way from Provincetown through into Rhode Island. So Perry says, they protect us in winter, they watch over creation when everything sleeps. And in their belief system, I've been asked, by the way, when I was collecting information for this book, there are certain things I'm not allowed to say. So I'll just give you a little bit of this. Apparently, in their belief system, human beings were originally made of stone, but they misunderstood death, and so they did not respect life. And they were then created of wood, the symbology reminding them that they were part of Earth, even as the forests were, which I think is, beautiful and poetic. So the winter wetus were covered with bark and chestnut. We don't have the chestnuts that we used to have because of blight, but there was often huge swaths of chestnut bark that would cover the winter longhouses. and talk about matting. So I have an informant who's a museum quality artisan. Her name is Julia Marden. She was just honored at the Tomahawk Museum. And she talks about creating mats, interior mats, and exterior mats. Let me see if I can find some interior matting for you. That's going to be an interior mat. That's bulrush. There we go. That's a really great picture of an interior set of mats for a longhouse. And we can see the cattail. So the exterior would be the cattail matting, and the interior would be the bulrush matting. And Julia always talks about how extremely efficient this is. I mean, these people have been here for 12,000 years, and it looks simple, and we think of it as primitive, but it's not. These beaches were much warmer than when the Pilgrims came and built their square houses. And if you go to Plymouth Patuxent museums in the winter, the difference between one of the Pilgrim houses and one of the Wampanoag wetus is amazing. Because of the round shape, it conserves the heat, but also the matting and the bark and the interior mats create a circulatory system which really works, and it will take rain. Rain will go right down those cattails, and it will just drip on out. It's not going to go inside and get everything wet. So the cattail and the bulrush was dyed with natural plants, and the matting was created by a technique called twining. It's a type of loomless weaving. Again, Marden, I like this quote. She explains that the exterior cattail mats are extremely efficient. Rain runs down the reeds, works into the mats, and spins back out. You can read accounts in Mort's relation of the Pilgrims coming into wetus in the middle of the winter and just being very, very warm, almost too warm, even if a fire isn't on. So the fiber, so the interior matting could not only be made of bulrushes, but corn husks, false nettle, butterfly weed, milkweed, dogbane, the inner bark of basswood and cedar, and not just the interior matting. This is a piece in progress that is multi-generational that Julia was doing with her daughter and her granddaughter. And she learned some of her craft at Plymouth Patuxent Museum. Some of it is handed down by oral tradition, and some of it, which I will talk about a little later, well maybe I'll talk about it now. Some of the I don't know what the right word is, some of the requisitioning of old arts, of traditional crafts and arts, has come through visions and dreams, something that the Western world doesn't quite get. But for instance, the Wampanoag Language Reclamation Project that Jessie Little Dover started, it actually, some of the information started to come to her in visions and dreams. So the fibers are rubbed in strands of 2 on a thigh until they're spun long enough to use. And they can be dyed with such as, does anyone here do weaving or natural dyeing or, you know, well, I love this. They can be dyed with bloodroot, staghorn, sumac, walnut, and chestnut husks to colors including yellow, orange, red, black, brown, and the natural color of the fiber is also used. And the twine designs were geometric, they're floral, they could be of the 4 directions, and they could be of the sacred tree of life, or anything else that inspired the artisan, usually geometric. I mean, it was not a literal type of rendition that we in the West are used to. But this is not Wampanoag, this is a Chippewa bag. It's very, very ancient, but it is made by twining. This is probably a twine bag, but it may be a finger woven bag. And finger weaving is slightly different than twining. With the twining, you attach warp over, you just twist more than one strand of weft around one or more warps using your fingers, and no loom, as we saw in the picture further back, where at the beginning it is attached to a tree limb or a frame, in this case in the modern world, but no real loom. And with finger weaving, you just attach strands to a tree or a stick, it's more like braiding. And one of the things, the only piece of information I have in my book that I didn't get directly from the horse's mouth was one that I'm very fond of. Mashpee Wampanoag Marlene Lopez, who is the daughter of the late Vernon Lopez, who was the chief for many, many years and just died recently at the age of 101, beloved. She said in a film for the Smithsonian's National Museum of American Indian that the design significance in finger weaving, I don't see it here, it's not here, but I like this anyway. I do have a sample of it in the book. Is that there is a center eye, which is creation watching. The strands bring individuals together to create community. The energy and prayers of the maker go into the sash or belt for the protection of the wearer. It's a belt, not a bag. And the weaving has continuity, for it may be passed down for generations. And lastly, if it's a belt or a sash, the fringe and the ends may both sweep the ground, making contact with the earth, and moving with the air, bring prayer up to the Creator. Again, it's quintessentially Wampanoag, an indigenous way of viewing the world, and kind of the power of metaphor, whether you're a believer or not in a higher power. Nonetheless, that power of poetry to create a world, I always find very moving, and it's one of the reasons that I'm so intrigued with these cultures. By the way, these are by Julia Marden and her daughter. This actually is one of the first things her granddaughter made, and it's a carrying bag. And the tunk line is finger woven, and the bag itself is twined. Because not only did they twine interior mats, but Julia says that we made cordage as fine as silk and as heavy as rope for any need you can think of. Fishing nets and lines, lashings for houses, as well as storage mats and bags. And those bags in the past were often used to store dried berries, meat, fish, squash, corn flour, seeds, and nuts. She says that they were the 17th century Tupperware. This is a small storage bag. And this is an artful storage, kind of a jar, that is her own interpretation, not based on really on anything traditional, but using the traditional means of twining, which brings me to a really important point. All of these artisans told me that they were inspired by their traditions and by their ancestors. And that while they wanted to honor those and keep those going, and they used those traditional methods, they're in the modern world, like us, and they have evolved like us. And so they want to bring their arts into the modern world and very much into the future for future generations. So there's often a really interesting synthesis between the tradition and the transitional and the modern. And that's really a good example of that synthesis of past and present in this, which I absolutely love. I want that. Julia also has brought back a really ancient art of twining turkey feathers. And here she's twined a turkey feather mantle, which is very warm, on an Annawon, which is a doll that she makes. They're called an Annawon. And she has recently created one that is life-size for an adult, which is kind of amazing. These are various and sundry of twined and finger woven work and a little bit of other crafts in there. And now we come to what else you need in, in the wetu. You need pots. And this is a pot that is created by Nosapocket, Ramona Peters. She is a revered elder. She's the formal tribal historic preservation officer for the Mashpee Wampanoag, and she's the founder of the Native Land Conservancy. If any of you are interested in the land back movement, which is basically we're all on indigenous land, so give it back. Yeah, I mean, it can be problematic, but if you have land that you want to give back to any tribe, including the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, there are various Native Land Conservancies around the country, but ours here is very active, and land has been donated and bequeathed back to the tribe, which is very, very exciting. Years ago, one of my proudest accomplishments is helping to save 300 acres of land that is sacred to the tribe that was going to become a golf course. And we got a team together and we stopped it and we saved it. Yay. So Ramona talks about the circularity of her pots, of all Wampanoag pots, and you can see one in that case in the back when you later. Yeah, you can see it from here. A really good example of one. And that circular roundness echoes back to what Annawon talks about with the wetu and the shape of the wetu. Ramona says we didn't have squares in our culture. Everything was curvilinear and circular, and that relates to the philosophy also of the circle of life, the circle of the seasons, the circle of human beings. There's so many circles in indigenous belief. You can see that exemplified in the hoop dance out west that Navajo people do and some Plains Indians do. All those interconnected circles of life. So she talks about how her pots each have a spirit and that the creations are a bit like children, especially vital when she's creating them, although she may forget where they've gone once they've been fired and sent out into the world. I love that. So she basically taught herself the art. She looked at pieces of ceramics that her family had. She didn't know their age. She examined them along with museum collections to figure out techniques, to figure out how the stylus is used to indent or emboss, or paddles with cords were wrapped around to press into the wet clay. So she says, pots that I make are culturally informed by my Wampanoag ancestors, and the shape is traditional, as I mentioned, with the rounded bottoms which receive heat differently than flat-bottomed. The fire goes around the piece of wood and the pot mimics a fired shape, she says. And she also says that there are male and female elements within a pot which express a symbolic representation of the way we were and are. And it's important to mention that the pots are coiled. Anybody here a potter? Because if you look at the pot in the back, or you go to Salt Pond Area Visitor Center and they have a pot, or you look at Ramona's pots, which by the way can be humongous, from here to way up, because there are so many different uses for pots. Actually, pots were used sometimes in one period of Wampanoag prehistory for funerary rites, for ashes. And of course they're used to cook, and they're used for storage, and they're used for carrying water and so forth. But if you look at the pot, it's incredibly thin, and you would think that it was thrown on a wheel, but it's coiled, and then scrape, and then is it fired in a kiln? No, it's fired outside in a specific type of fire. And one of the things that she talks about is the relationship of clay to the elements, to earth, air, fire, and water, and how that inspires her. These are pots that were created. Anybody know what the clay there is from, where it was gotten? A quina is a hint. Oh, yes, exactly, yeah. So this is gayhead clay. The cliffs of gayhead are multicolored, and a woman named Gladys Wittes perfected this technique. It's kind of unique to her, and then the Vanderhoof family on the island also has carried it on. This is courtesy of the Martha's Vineyard Museum. And now we come to one of my favorite things I could write a whole other book about, and that's wampum. So a lot of us are familiar with wampum as something that you wear, but a lot of us are not familiar with the sacred use of wampum, as wampum was used for the tribes. Elizabeth James Perry was my informant for wampum creation. A couple of other people were as well. There's a ton of, not a ton, but there are some excellent creators of wampum in the tribe, Hardman Dietz being one who is exhibited in museums, and so is Elizabeth James Perry. This is an alliance belt, and it is handcrafted. And she did use modern tools. She didn't use a sand drill, but nonetheless, it's handcrafted, and it's kind of a mystery as to how wampum was created in the past. So first of all, what is wampum? Okay, so it is it is beads, both cylindrical and discoidal, that have been shaped from the interior of clams, of particularly quahogs and of whelks. And in the past, before contact, nobody is quite sure how they did it, but they probably did it with stone drills, which is insane and would have taken incredible skill. But in about 1627, a guy named Isaac de Rizier came to Plymouth Colony. He was a Dutchman, and he saw that wampum was being used as a medium of exchange, and he thought, well, this would make a really good currency. So he's the guy who went back to the Dutch and kind of invented the idea of using wampum as money. And that was a little bit of a bastardization of what the tribes used it for, because wampum, and I'm going to read again, I have to find, Elizabeth Perry talks about its incredible ceremonial significance. Ocean water, she says, is the origin of life, so important to coastal and island people because it defines us. And so wampum is very much of the sea, tooled as it is from the quahogs and the whelks, which also give much loved food to the people. So that this connection also to water is important because water as medicine confers spiritual power to wampum. And it has a lot to do, she says, a little cryptically, with acknowledging the connection between the sea and the sky. It came in two colors, as you can see, purple and white. They each had different names. The names are in my book. They were kind of colloquially known as, I think it was Hoke and Peak and Hoke, the Hoak, the purple being the Hoke and the white being the Peak. And forgive me if I'm wrong, if anyone here is of Wampanoag lineage, correct me. But the purple was representative of the darker side of life, and the white of the lighter, more innocent side of life. So there was again that duality that is in so much of Wampanoag belief system and indigenous belief system. She talks about it representing sun and moon, woman and man, life and death. Purple may indicate seriousness, sadness, hardship, tough times. likely to be worn by adults, while stuff with wampum artifacts is more white, more likely to be worn by children because they're new and they're innocent. Oh, I should mention, importantly, that wampum was kind of like the holy text. Wampum belts, here you go. Okay, yeah, importance. So this is Annawon Weeden, and he's laden with wampum, all of which has ceremonial significance to him and has not been shared with me. But wampum belts were given to cement alliances, particularly amongst the Iroquoian people, but also amongst the Algonquian people. If they were rimmed with white, that would be a sign of peace. If they had red on them, that would be a sign of war. There are belts that essentially are the holy scriptures of certain tribes, and certain people can read them and understand what they signify. So they acted as a kind of a word I always get wrong, mnemonic. Thank you, yes. So, excuse me. Another thing she mentions is how the white wampum is associated with ideas that are associated with eagle feathers. And that wampum itself embodies a lot of star symbolism going back to ancient traditions and observances around celebrations of certain constellations at certain times of year. And it's about sharing abundance. And she says it's one of the things that defines her as an Wampanoag woman. I could go on. I mean, wampum, one of the misuses of wampum was that the English demanded tribute in the 17th century from sachems of fathoms of wampum. And they had to go to great lengths to create those 60 fathoms or whatever you have to give to the English to kind of a protection racket. So I was going to say, so the one good thing about contact was, not a lot of good things about contact if you're Wampanoag, but they got nails, and so they were able to use nails in the bow drills to hasten the creation of wampum beads. Okay, well, I will stop my dissertation on wampum, except for this. So this is King Philip. How many of you have heard of King Philip and King Philip's War? Are excellent. Allegedly the bloodiest war outside the Civil War on American soil. King Philip, you can't see the whole thing here, but he's wearing a wampum belt, which signifies his royalty and has all kinds of symbolism on it that probably has to do with tribal history, with his clan membership, and maybe his personal visions. He's wearing, I think it's, I know it's in my notes, but I know it's in the book. Let me see I think it was 9 yards. Don't quote me on that, but it's quite a length of wampum. That belt that he is wearing was taken during King Philip's War. King Philip's head was also taken and put on a pike in Plymouth, and many of his fellow Wampanoag people were sold into slavery if they weren't killed. So the belt is really important to the tribe, and they really wanted to see if they could find it. The last known handler was Benjamin Church, and someone else Captain Benjamin Church, and someone that he handed the belt to. I don't have the name in front of me. So they went on a search for it in England, and they thought they might have come close, but they didn't. So they decided, Paula Peters in particular and other tribal members decided to create their own ceremonial belt that would kind of call back, and here it is, call back Philip's belt, because again, they feel that the beads in this are alive. It has living spirit, and so its spirit could go to the spirit of Philip Spelt and perhaps call it back. If you have a chance to see this new ceremonial bell, new as of a couple of years ago, it was created for the Plymouth 400th commemoration. It's been shown at the Box Museum in UK. It has been shown here at the Cahoon Museum of American Art and other places. If you ever have a chance to see it, go, because there's a lot of information that goes with it that Paula and her has created. And there's a lot of symbolism. There's the tree of life in the middle, there are eagles, there are wolves that are protectors. The thing that looks like a helicopter is a whale, so important to the Wampanoag people, and particularly the Wampanoag people. One of my favorite things that was ever told to me was when Ramona Peters said, you know, we had treaties with animals. And one of the animals we had a treaty with was the whale, so that they would give themselves to the tribe. Okay, so much for my dissertation. The next thing is regalia. And this is created by Mother Bear, Anita Peters, I mentioned before, the one with the sign about the pilgrims on the back of her car. She calls herself the tribe's Vera Wang. So people will come to her. Some of the regalia, by the way, is not, obviously it's not worn every day. It's special, it's for powwow, it's for ceremony. And it has personal symbols on it. People will come to her with a personal symbol that they want on their regalia, and she'll work with them to create it. Interestingly, I was told by Paul Savage, I hadn't known this, that the blue dye was something that wasn't made indigenously, and was one of the reasons that trade began to flourish between Wampanoag people and Europeans. I have not verified that. I don't, haven't checked another source, but I tend to think it's true. It's really hard to get a blue dye going. So some clothing's for daily coverage. This is a breech clout and leggings. Breech clout covering your groin and leggings covering your legs for men. Some's for daily coverage, some is symbolic for use in ceremonial powwow, like the famed jingle dresses of the Ojibwe and the Anishinaabe people, and that have curative powers in them. Clothing has symbols indicating status, clan affiliation, personal vision, tribal history, even as wampum can. To create the clothing, what did we use? What did they use?
Deer?
Yes, yeah. Out west it would have been buffalo or elk or deer. But here it was largely deer. And I know people are squeamish about hunting, but that deer was worshipped. It was respected. It was taken with grace. And almost every culture in America would take the remnants, they would use, and you probably all know this because it's become a cliche, but it's true, they would use everything. So they'd use the meat, they'd use the skin, they'd use the sinew, they'd use the hoofs for glue, they'd use the dew claws for their rattles, they'd use the antlers to make tools, they'd use the intestines to create sausages and water bags. Nothing went to waste. But whatever was left was wrapped up ceremonially and given a burial and prayed over, so that the spirit of the animal will go to the other animals and say, these are good people, come back and feed them again. That's pretty universal. So in the past, hides were brain tanned and they were sewn with bone needles, and designs were painted, and this is from Anita, were painted from minerals of graphite, red and yellow ochre, ground up and mixed with bear fat, applied with a little stick. But she says, now I can go to Joanne's Fabrics, and there are not many bears there. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is David Weeden and Linda Linda Coombs has a wonderful book out on the Wampanoag. I highly recommend it. And they are in regalia that they have created for themselves, which is, I mean, could you get more couture, man? You know, it's gorgeous. This is Julia Marden in regalia she created for herself with a turkey feather fan. And that brings me to a less essential but still useful part of life, which is adornment and accoutrements. So Jonathan James Perry, who's a Queen Wampanoag and who is Elizabeth James Perry's brother, he's the informant for some of this in my book, and he creates pipes and adornment that's both traditional and modern, using ancient and modern techniques. His copper pieces, I love these. These are called harpoon earrings, and to me, they look like lightning that came down from the sky and just congealed. His copper pieces, here's another one, a gorget. They're cold hammered. That is a process by which metal is annealed, using heat and quick cooling to make it malleable for expansion, drawing it out into a sheet form to shape it. But it's not ever heated and poured into a mold. His stuff just pulses with a kind of mystical and classic modernity, and it's filled with symbolism. This is a Scrimshaw piece called Balance Space, and this is my surmise. He did not tell me, but based on other knowledge that I have of Algonquian mythology in general, it pretty much appears that on the left side is a creature called Mishipeshu, and here the Wampanoag would call him Hobamok. And that's the underwater serpent, who is a common creature all the way across this country with very different names. And he is often in battle with the Thunderbirds on the right, the underspirits and the overspirits. And then in the middle is probably the path to the Milky Way, probably the righteous path of balance. And indeed, I think that is why he named it Balanced Face, because he does talk about balance, that when you're out of balance, you're going to be sick, and when you're in balance, you're going to be okay. And he says that's why Native people braid their hair. It's to bring a kind of harmony into their own practice. Bringing together, as he says, when you braid your hair, you're bringing together mind, body, and spirit every day. And we go back to the secular version of adornment, which often is wampum. These are Carol Lopez, the late, and her daughter pieces. And that brings me to transitional. So there are artists who do create, in the Western tradition, art that is to hang on a wall. However, this is by Robert Peters, they do take from their tradition, from their sacred tradition and their belief system to create art to hang on a wall. And Robert is a cousin of Nosapocket and of Mother Bear, and his art is beloved in the tribe. He's written a book called 13 Moons, and he talks about that synthesis between past and present. He says, I want to depict the way we are now, not the past, though the past informs the present through the continuation of traditions, particularly ceremonial ones. But we're here right now. This is what we experience now. This is what we go through now. That's what I know. So his art is infused with visions. He's in the vapor bath. He's in the here, and his spirit visions are coming down in on him through the heat. And here, he says that this is the one that Native people most identify with, and that he says is himself. And it's just a pen and ink Because this guy, he's totally between two worlds. He was an MBTA supervisor, and also a Mashpee Wampanoag person, but living in an urban environment, and totally between two worlds, and able to cope more or less with both. And he's a firekeeper, which is an important role. And in the book, there's a long interview with him where he just speaks for himself, and I ask him questions. But a fascinating guy, working class guy, started a fire for the tribe that lasted for 10 years, and has a little bit of a mystery to it. So why does he say that this is the one natives identify with the most, and that it is the one that's the most himself? Anybody guess?
He's isolated between two.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, look at the alienation there. There's coyote out there howling at the moon, but there's the civilization that's taking his space away. Yeah, totally. So he paints with acrylics, but he said I did a self-exercise for 3 years when I didn't draw with a pencil, but only a pen. And he started doing his best work about around 2007. And lastly, an old friend of mine, Jo Mills Brennan, she's a multimedia artist, and her art is not Wampanoag, doesn't have, but she takes her inspiration from nature. She's very much grounded to the natural world. She lives on a pond on some of that land that we all saved. And she's a musician. She composes on native flute, one of which was made for her by Nosapocket. And she's got a group of compositions called Breath of Prayer CDs. She's deeply influenced by nature, by color, by light, and a little bit by her tribe as well. I mean, her themes in some cases are deeply of her tribe, particularly this one. It's called The Offering, and there are so many elements here that are of the tribe. There's the basket, there's the cornmeal, and there are the quahogs, and there's the ocean, which is so important. So I always like to end with Emma. This is an embroidery that she did called The Gatherer. One of the pieces that I have in the book that's not in this talk is Eastern People. It's a weaving which she just taught herself to do, and which embodies the spirit within each of us as the sun rises. Birth of spirit breaks darkness and travels its journey to Creator. But there's a piece that's in the book that is called One Sustains Us, One Does Not, that was commissioned and permanently exhibited at the Mashpee Wampanoag Museum. And she says, I chose to show all the wildlife covered by a golf course. The now disappeared pollywog's eggs, pollywogs, snakes, turtles, frogs are beaded and embroidered, and at the top there's a linear pattern of golf trees with a ball and a flag with a $sign on it above them. I used to go to that bog ditch with a cousin when we were young. The ditch was black with pollywogs, wagging their little tails, black with them. Did they inform anyone before they just filled it in? We just cover life like that. So I'm going to end there and open the floor to any questions that you might have. And by the way, in the book, there's a ton of artists and artisans who have not been covered, and I do list some of them at the end of the book. And also there's an appendix as to where you can see some of this art, what museums and historical societies show it. This Eastham Historical Society is in the book. And there are websites as well for artisans you might want to contact directly so that you can purchase their art. That's it, yada yada.